you're out there, you're listening, you're afraid. You're afraid of us, you're afraid of change. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't see the future. I'm not here to tell you how this is going to end. I'm here to tell you how this is going to begin. I'm going to start this broadcast, and when I do, I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. A world without controls and boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. So I wanted to do a follow-up video to the documentary I released yesterday titled Charlottesville, What Really Happened. If you haven't watched it already, I strongly suggest that you do. Once and for all, I decided I would put an end to the debate over how President Trump responded to Charlottesville and who was at fault for the violence that took place on that day. But I thought it was very telling that as I did research for the Charlottesville documentary, I mean, this happened at the same time. You should have saw it through my eyes. As I'm researching the documentary that I'm going to make to explain what happened in Charlottesville and the media's response, we have the MS13 animals comment situation with the media and President Trump. If you missed it, basically, President Trump was asked a question, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically it was something along the lines of, what are we going to do with MS13 gang members coming into the country over the southern border? Something along those lines. The topic was MS13. And Trump responded by calling the MS13 gang members animals. Perfectly reasonable. They are animals. But the mainstream media, doing what the media does, they showed President Trump's response without playing the question. And they plastered this response everywhere. They say President Trump was talking about immigrants crossing the southern border. He called all immigrants, all Latinos, all Spanish people, animals. Trump believes you to be less than human, so you should view him as being less than human. It's a psychological operation. Now, people like me, free thinkers on the internet, called this out instantly. They said, no, we're going to play you the question, and the woman asking the question says, again, something along the lines of, hey, President Trump, what are we going to do with all these MS-13 gang members coming to the country? And President Trump responds by calling them animals and saying what he plans to do with the MS-13 gang members. And because it was so clear that what the media had reported was dishonest, you saw mainstream media news outlet after mainstream media news outlet retract their original story, correct the record, say, President Trump wasn't referring to all immigrants. He was referring to MS-13 violent gang members who cross the border illegally, sell drugs, commit murders, commit rapes, and have very little respect for the rule of law and human life in general. But of course, what we see with these retractions, because we've seen this a lot over the course of the Trump presidency. Just think about Donald Trump Jr. Emailing with WikiLeaks, where the media basically reported that Trump Jr. was having secret conversations with WikiLeaks regarding Hillary Clinton's emails before they were released. Well, it turns out it happened, these communications happened after the emails were released, and the story was completely misleading. But the public just sees the original story, they don't see the retraction. And it fits right into confirmation bias, right? So people who already believe Trump to be a racist, they say, okay, well, of course Donald Trump called all immigrants animals because he's an unalloyed racist. He hates everyone that's not white. And we know that. Just look at what happened with Charlottesville. You see how I brought that full circle? So someone who has a misunderstanding of what happened in Charlottesville, of course they're going to take the Donald Trump calling all immigrants animals comment at face value. And that's why I did the documentary that I did on Charlottesville, because I wanted to set the record straight. So basically what I did was I put together the 3 press conferences that Donald Trump did on August 12th, August 14th, and August 15th, 2017. The Charlottesville riots, of course, started on August 12th. So President Trump, in front of the country, went on national television. He said he condemns the hatred, the bigotry, and the violence on both sides. Both sides, the alt-right and the alt-left, of what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia at the Unite the Right rally. Of course, the mainstream media then jumped all over this. They said Donald Trump failed to condemn the KKK, the neo-Nazis, and I would actually agree to a point that he should have come out more firmly, not just against the KKK and the neo-Nazis. He should have named every single group that deserved blame for the violence that took place in Charlottesville. But that's not what the media was getting at. They just wanted to create a straw man, to make the public believe that Donald Trump was sympathetic to the KKK, sympathetic to neo-Nazis. And they ran this narrative that he was sympathetic to their cause, and that they were solely to blame for everything that took place in Charlottesville. So a few days later, the 14th, Trump says, okay, I'm sure his team advised him, you need to clarify. So he holds a second press conference, and he comes out very strongly. Says he condemns the neo-Nazis, he condemns the KKK, he condemns racism and bigotry, that he said he was going to make America great, and he didn't mean that for white people. He's going to make America great again for all people. But the media continued to push their narrative, saying that it was too late, a day late and a dollar short. And they pushed this narrative that the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, the KKK were the sole actors behind the violence that took place at Charlottesville. So what I did is I put together a complication of raw footage showing just how violent ANTIFA, communist ANTIFA, was on August 12th in Charlottesville, Virginia. And for those of us that paid attention, we know that Antifa showed up with shields, baseball bats, sticks, jars full of urine, pepper spray, all kinds of chemicals. They came looking for blood, communist Antifa, just as the communist neo-Nazis came looking for blood. And you see how the mainstream media, they use psychological warfare, because, quite frankly, not a lot of people have the balls to tell the truth, right? I mean, someone could take clips from this video and say, you see, this guy's a white supremacist. This guy's a neo-Nazi. Look at him. He's sympathetic to Nazis and the KKK. He's doing this video defending Nazis. Well, Nazis could go fuck themselves. The KKK could go fuck themselves. Excuse my language, but I have to come out that strongly to make my position clear. But the truth has to always be spoken, no matter how uncomfortable the truth is. And Antifa, although the media won't tell you this, is the alt-left's moral equivalent to the alt-right's KKK and neo-Nazis. Because communism is the moral equivalent to National Socialism, to Nazism. The media, of course, won't tell you that, and we'll get into why that is in a minute. But I wanted to point out that Antifa showed up and they were just as violent, just as hateful, just as murderous as the Nazis, and that President Trump was correct in his statement condemning the hatred, violence, and bigotry of not just the alt-right KKK neo-Nazis, but the alt-left communist Antifa. His statement was truthful and accurate And that's very important. But the media attempted to push a fictitious narrative for their political gain, which is something we've seen from the mainstream media really all the time, but specifically what I wanted to point out is with Antifa. Antifa, if you pay attention, routinely attack peaceful, your run-of-the-mill Republican speakers, conservative speakers, libertarian speakers. They've attacked the events and physically attacked the supporters of David Horowitz. You can notice that name's Jewish. Ann Coulter, Ben Shapiro, again, Jewish, not quite your Nazi. Milo Yiannopoulos, again, Jewish, not quite your Nazi. Dave Rubin, an openly homosexual man. By the way, Milo Yiannopoulos has a big black husband with a big black who bangs him in his butt. So I doubt that he's KKK and neo-Nazi, in spite of what the mainstream media might tell you. But Antifa has attacked these events at Berkeley, all over the country, and they have physically attacked and hurt people. There was a man at a Night for Freedom event in New York City who attended a Night for Freedom. That was an event put together by Mike Cernovich, Stefan Molyneux. If you don't follow Stefan Molyneux, follow Stefan Molyneux. He's fantastic. It's not about the positions he takes. It's about spreading logic, reason, and classical philosophy, something our society needs very, very desperately. It's why people are always told what to think, but people don't know how to think. And how to think is more important than what to think. I always say to never view me as an authority. I am not an authority. I am just a person giving you my opinion based on my observations, based on the facts, the logic, the reason that I used, along with empirical data. But a man was attacked at a Night for Freedom event by Antifa. He was hit in the head. I believe his skull was cracked open. He might have permanent brain damage, never be the same. Tommy Robinson might not agree with his politics, doesn't matter. He's walking on the streets in London. 6 members of Antifa show up. They beat down him and his female camerawoman. The only thing that makes us a free society, that separates us from being barbarians, is that we agree to handle things with words and not with violence. And again, just this week, as I was filming, I believe the day I was filming the documentary for Charlottesville, or finishing it up, Faith Goldie, independent journalist, right-winger, not a Nazi, was attacked by members of Antifa, and she had her camera smacked to the ground by a grown man, a member of Antifa. She was hit by this grown man, and if the police weren't there, who knows what would have happened to her. But the mainstream media hasn't reported on this. The mainstream media has empowered Antifa by creating a wall of ignorance. The public doesn't understand that Antifa is a domestic terrorist organization, and they don't understand that because the mainstream media has gone out of their way to not report on it. So if we were going to hold the media by their own standards, because Donald Trump came out and he condemned the violence on both sides. He said the alt-right, the KKK, the neo-Nazis are bad, and the alt-left also had responsibility. Now, earlier I said I wish you would have named the groups. If I were Donald Trump, I would have came out and said, I condemn the racism, the hatred, the violence, the bigotry on the alt-right, members of the KKK, members of the neo-Nazis. I condemn the hatred, the violence, the racism, the bigotry, the murderous ideology of the alt-left's Antifa. He should have came out and he should have said that. But if we were to hold the media to their own standards, because they wanted Trump to come out and further clarify, to disavow the alt-right, why are we not pressuring the mainstream media? Every single member of the mainstream media, every single member of the Democratic Party, and the neocons, the rhinos, the Republicans in name only, on the right, to come out and condemn the hatred and violence of the domestic terrorist group Antifa. Keith Ellison, high-ranking member of the Democratic Party, actually posted a picture of an Antifa pamphlet, Antifa literature, saying this is what we need, openly supporting a domestic terrorist organization that's primary aim or primary method is to use violence, force, and intimidation to silence political opponents who are only attempting to use their words. When is the media and the Democratic Party going to be held accountable? When are their feet going to be held to the fire to disavow Antifa? And when are we going to pressure the mainstream media to publicly cover each act of violence that continues to take place from the domestic terrorist group Communist Antifa? Because until that happens, until we hold them responsible, the violence is going to continue. But the mainstream media is not going to report on it. And we have to ask ourselves, if the mainstream media, if the Democratic Party, if the rhinos, if they won't come out and condemn Antifa violence, and they represent the oligarchy, the political establishment in control of the country for many years, then can't we draw the conclusion if they won't report on it? Because imagine if this were alt-right neo-Nazis, KKK doing this type of violence, it's all you would see on the news. So can't we draw the conclusion that Antifa is actually the government-sanctioned domestic terrorist organization with government permission, with mainstream media permission to silence anti-establishment political ideology and political opponents? I think the question has to be asked. And there's one more aspect of this, really of all of American culture, that needs to be spoken about, because it's not being talked about enough, it's not being talked about in our school system, and it's not being spoken about in the mainstream press and popular culture. There was an episode of Seinfeld many years ago, and Elaine goes into a restaurant and she goes to order soup, and the guy who owns the restaurant, he's very nasty. Elaine pisses him off and he says, "No soup for you! No soup for you!" And Elaine's not allowed to buy soup there anymore. Kramer goes there, "No soup for you!" And he's barring all these people. He's exiling these people from his restaurant. They're not allowed to buy soup from him. So they nickname him the Soup Nazi, right? And we see that all over society. If children in a classroom have a nasty teacher, a gym teacher, they say, "Oh, it's the gym Nazi," right? Whoever it might be, if someone's nasty, you say, "Oh, it's the water Nazi," right? That's a bad person. Well, in my house, because we already know Nazis are bad because it's all over culture, and that's great. It should be all over culture. I actually say, when my dog is barking and he doesn't like when people laugh. So when my dog starts to laugh and I have company over and he's barking at people and I want him to stop, I say, "Buddy, stop being the fun communist. We're not being the fun communist instead of the fun Nazi." And then that always spurs up conversation. What do you mean the fun communist? And that's what I'm getting into. That our culture doesn't make it clear that communists are just as hateful and just as violent as Nazis. And the ideology of communism is just as murderous, just as repressive, and just as enslaving as National Socialism. 40 to 60 million people were murdered by the communist government in the Soviet Union. Another 40, 60 million people murdered by the communist government under Mao in China. Repressive North Korea, right? The most repressive country in the world, is a communist hereditary dictatorship. Yet, our popular culture, right? The New York Times writes articles, why Karl Marx was right. No, Karl Marx was dead wrong. He was dead wrong. He said that he was right about that the wage gap between the rich and the poor would widen. But he thought that more and more people would get poor. Instead, capitalism resulted in the largest middle class in the history of the world. And what doesn't get spoken about capitalism a lot. I just want to talk why Karl Marx was wrong really quickly. Poverty has changed under capitalism, right? America, which is, it's been socialized, but it's still, the remnants of capitalism still survives. What is poverty in America is not what is poverty in North Korea. The floor of what is poor changes. In America, if you're poor, you have a place to live, you're able to travel, you can get around with bus fare, you have a cell phone, you have food to eat. Poor in America is fat. That's made possible by capitalism. So Karl Marx was wrong. But in our culture, you don't see this. In fact, there's polls that show tens of thousands of college professors identify as cultural Marxists, a extremely deadly ideology. And the mainstream media, popular culture, they further push this message that socialism is cool, communism is cool. Well, in Venezuela, they eat zoo animals. That's not cool. In Venezuela, they eat zoo animals. In the United States of America, the poor eat so many hamburgers that they eventually die of diabetes. And that is why communism is not cool. And the other part of it, of course, is it's a completely repressive ideology. It doesn't just make people poor. It's, well, put it this way. National socialism, right? Nazism, socialism. It's been people that follow are neo-Nazis today, right? They are right-wing because they've been convinced that neo-Nazism is a right-wing ideology. But if you study forensic history, you know that National Socialism was a splinter from communism. So the original National Socialists, Mussolini, these people were communists. And they simply split off and said, we could do this slightly differently. And the reason both ideologies are so repressive and deadly is because they both promote collectivism. And when you promote collectivism, the good of all of society, the mythical utopia, in order to get that, you have to squash the rights of the individual. And when the rights of the individual are squashed, that results in tens of millions of people being executed by their government, whether it's the Nazis, whether it's the communists in the Soviet Union. And that results with people who question the government's authority being put into concentration camps or being put into gulags, the communist equivalent of the concentration camp. But this isn't taught in our culture. And we need to do a better job of highlighting it. And I'm going to talk more about this in the near future. So I just wanted to have a conversation about my Charlottesville documentary, talk about the Trump animal comment because I had missed it, or I was busy when that happened, so I didn't talk about it, and see how it really all ties together. And if you see, and I'm not saying Trump's some perfect guy, but if you see, and it's beyond him, but if you see the Trump animal comment and how it's manipulated to make people think, oh, Trump's this racist bigot, he should be dehumanized, his supporters are hateful, and then you see the same thing was done with Charlottesville, he's this racist bigot, he supports the KKK, the Nazis, both untrue. What other things do you know about President Trump and his racism and his hateful heart that you know that actually aren't true? And this isn't just unique to him, just all things in general. I always try to test myself, right? So I'm always having arguments, an internal dialectic, right? Just to make sure, say, am I right about this? Is there something I'm missing? Because as soon as you come across someone who just knows they're right about everything, you could almost bet they're almost wrong about everything.